From Jackson Carman versus Cordell Volson to the wide receiver 4 battle to Joe Burrow's rookie window, we answer your questions in this week's mailbag.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're podcasting from the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your Cincinnati Bengals every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We appreciate all of you who subscribe, who follow, and who make us your first listen. James, we're going to dive into the mailbag today, and as is often the case in preseason mailbags, a lot of questions about roster competitions, about who's going to make the team, about who's going to start where there are starting competitions. And we'll even get into some thoughts on what the window of competitiveness actually is for the Cincinnati Bengals toward the end of the show. We're going to start with a question from Kevin Brown at KD Brown 357 on Twitter. He wants to know if Cordell Volson looks like he'll actually be ready to start game one, or if he simply looks better by comparison to what we've seen from Jackson Carman.
Well, it's the latter, certainly. And is there a world where, Cordell Volson is ready to go week one and can be a starter week one? Yeah, I think so. I think that happens in the NFL. We've talked about it really throughout this offensive line famine that the Bengals have gone through in recent years. Like, teams find mid-round guards that end up working out. Right? Alex Kappa is a perfect example of that for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, a couple things. It's one thing to do that. It's another, and Kappa did this from Humboldt State, but to go from North Dakota State University to the NFL to starting week one as a rookie, that's a lot. Not impossible. Could certainly be effective. And the thing I like, because let's be honest, Locked On Bengals is like Locked On Bengals / Joe Burrow, right? I mean, it's, Locked On Burrow sometimes when you talk about LOB. The fact that Zach Taylor and Frank Pollock both praised Cordell Volson's pass protection. Because if there's something that I really need that left guard to do, of the two, if I had to pick, be a great run blocker, be a great pass protector. Well, I want the latter because we know what the franchise is. And so I think given how the system they had at North Dakota State, I think he's going to be able to and capable of mentally processing all of the stuff needed to be a solid pass protector this season. And so I think that does give him an edge because he's got all of those other traits, all of the work ethic, attitude, all of those things, being open to getting better, self-critique, all of those things that you look for. At least that's what everyone's saying about him. So if he has that, he's got the size. I mean, we saw the video of him talking with Lyle Collins. Lyle Collins looking up to him a little bit, right? Cordell Volson's a big guy. And so I think it is certainly possible. Now, as we talk about this in the middle of August, do I love the idea of a 4th-round rookie from North Dakota State starting at left guard? No, not on paper, but I'm also open to the idea of him snatching that job, beating out Jackson Carman, and who knows, maybe be good enough in between a guy like Ted Karras and Jonah Williams to be an upgrade from what they had last year in Quentin Spain at left guard. I know that might be unrealistic, but I'm open to the idea of that happening. And I'm really excited to see Volson over the next couple of practices and then on Sunday against the Giants.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm really looking for Volson is how does he perform in these next couple preseason games? Does he get those opportunities? Does he continue to work with the ones? Do they have some sort of rotation? Because I think what Kevin's getting at here is Volson, and you said it too, James, he is coming from North Dakota State. There is a big transition. Frank Pollock has talked about this as well. And for whatever his attitude is, however hard on himself he is, however hard he works, there are things that rookies have to learn in the NFL. And very often there is a learning curve. And very often there are technical aspects of rookies' games that need to be refined. There are rookie mental lapses. But the thing about this competition right now is that Carman isn't showing anything that Volson isn't really. Maybe some measure of athleticism that Volson doesn't quite possess, but in terms of mental processing, in terms of reliability of technique, in terms of the body language, as much as I hate to talk about body language in general, just the general attitude that we seem to get, the vibe we seem to get from Jackson Carman versus what we have heard about Cordell Volson is kind of night and day. So while there are some athleticism differences and both guys have some technical development to do, it seems like Volson may be more mentally with it than Carman was on review of the tape. But we also need to see him do it against a higher level of competition. And so hopefully he will have that chance in preseason game 2 coming up on Sunday against the Giants, because that's the real next test for him. He's shown that he can process and play at a functional level in the second half of preseason game 1, in which no starters played for the Arizona Cardinals in the first half either. But now can he do it against a higher level of competition, hopefully from the New York Giants, who have a solid defensive line? And I don't know who's going to play for them, but there could be a bit of a steeper challenge there that shows that he's up to the job.
A little birdie told me that they're going to play their starters. So who knows if that birdie is true or not. Obviously, I'm referring to him as a birdie because I don't want to put him on record here. And who knows if it's right or not. But I think that the Bengals are preparing as if they're going to face the Giants starters at least a little bit, even though the Bengals aren't going to play their starters, which is good. That's what I want, hopefully.
If that's the case, that means Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams, two first-round picks, are the starting defensive tackles if they're going to play for the Giants, would be Cordell Volson's competition. So there's a real test, a real step up, not to mention potentially Azeez Ojulari on stunts, potentially Kayvon Thibodeau on stunts, on twists, on if they move those guys inside at any point. There's some real players on that defensive line for the Giants that hopefully we get to see Cordell Volson compete with.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see. And you're right, Kayvon Thibodeau, right? The 5th overall pick. That certainly going to be one that I'll have my eye on, just as a football fan, just to see how good he is or not. And, 4th rounder, Cordell Volson, if he faces him off against him at all, Isaiah Prince, all these other guys, it'll be fun to watch. But we have plenty of time to talk about Sunday's matchup against the Giants. But we do have a question about La'el Collins, so we'll stick with the offensive line coming up next. But first, a word from Elias Game Plan. It's the only sports app from the most trusted name in sports stats, Elias Sports Bureau, the official statisticians of the U.S. pro sports leagues, including the NFL. And look, the NFL season almost here. We have less than a month from the start of the NFL season. That's why you got to get Elias Game Plan and the Elias Game Plan app. It's the ultimate sports betting and fantasy companion for the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball. Get player news and league validated stats, team records, expert game analysis for betting, building your fantasy team, impressing friends. Look, you want to win your fantasy league. You want to win those wagers you're making. You can do that and get the help you need today with Elias Game Plan. So download the Elias Game Plan app today with new features available all the time. Take your game to the next level. NFL season right around the corner, so don't wait. Find Elias Game Plan in the App Store or the Play Store today.
Our next question, James, you mentioned about the offensive line. Andrew Burns, that Andrew_Burns94 on Twitter, would like to know what the concern level is around La'el Collins continuing to be limited or intermittently present at practices, not working with 11s yet, because I kind of agree with Andrew. At this point, concern levels are starting to inch up for me. And I say inch up. They're not sky high or anything like that, but it's starting to be a little bit concerning that he hasn't gotten those physical reps in for me.
Yeah, I get it. I think that honestly, if I had to predict the plan, it would be, all right, we're going to give you Monday off. You have Tuesday off because Tuesday's a full-on off day. Wednesday, let's get you in some team stuff. And so Wednesday, Thursday, will he do any team anything? Because if I'm the Bengals, I would want him to do some kind of team 11-on-11 before the Rams come to town. And I think the way it's going to work, based on what Zach Taylor said on Monday, Wednesday is going to be like a normal practice. Thursday is going to be pretty heavy with starters. Friday, it's not going to be much on starters, and they're going to kind of put the finishing touches on game prep and kind of treat it like a normal game week where it's walk through Friday anyway. So if that's the case, maybe Collins gets some teamwork in on Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not really concerned yet, just knowing how the Bengals and this staff has managed these players. T. Higgins has been ready to go for weeks. Logan Wilson has been ready to go for weeks, and they're just kind of slowly, trudging along, making sure that they're not just 100%, but that they're 100% at the end of August. And so I think that's what they're trying to do with La'el Collins. Now, is it a little weird? Yeah, it is. Weird that he's, back on the shelf on Monday afternoon, but not super concerned yet, especially because, and you've talked about this, Jake, a lot, the contract and what it is. It's all about those games, baby. He's got to play in those games. The way the Bengals and Duke Tobin and Katie Blackburn structured that contract, if LC wants that money, he's going to have to be there all 17 and play week in and week out. So hopefully this is just more of a maintenance plan, and let's play it really, really safe with number 71 than it is any issues. And so hopefully we'll see him in some type of team drills later this week.
Yeah, and that certainly could be the case. And I don't mean to say that I'm alarmed. I think I was pretty clear about that. I'm close to where you're at. It's just beginning to be with what you hear from Dallas fans constantly in the back of your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He hates practicing. He never liked to practice, all these things. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but when that is in the back of your mind and he's missing the significant portion of practice that he's missed with a mysterious back injury that he suffered away from the team doesn't have to tell us anything more than that. So they're not in the wrong at all. And he is, by all accounts, Zach Taylor talked about him getting the walkthrough reps in, him working with Cordell Volson after practice. We've seen him working on the side, taking pass sets, even when he's not participating in practice. He's still a really good player, but everyone feels better when all of the starters are on the field together, right? When you get all of the skill players and the newly assembled offensive line, there's some new players in the mix, especially in the trenches from Hayden Hurst all the way into center on the right side of that offensive line. So getting them together for some of these team drills, for some of the 11-on-11 work, seems like it would bear fruit and be a productive use of everyone's energy before the regular season.
For sure. And so next question comes from, as I stumble there, from Showtime at Barclay970, Trent Taylor, or Trent Edelman, as I like to refer to him as. Could he be the Bengals wide receiver 4? He looked really good the other night. And with Chase possibly making slot plays more, could we see Taylor utilized when one of the big 3 wide receivers need a break? Love the show. Help me understand more about the franchise and the rosters. I'm in the UK, so shout out to you, Showtime. Trent Taylor, a.k.a. Trent Edelman. You think he's going to be the wide receiver 4 this season, Jake?
I don't, from a snaps perspective, I don't think so. From a role perspective, I think that the guys behind the starters, behind the big 3, whatever you want to call them, are going to have interchangeable roles that will be used differently. I still think Stanley Morgan Jr. gets the most snaps out of any of the non-starting 3 wide receivers, barring injury, injury aside, I guess, because I think the Bengals have a very clear plan for him. We saw his usage increase last year as the year went on, and it just seems like he has a very clearly defined role. Trent Taylor, I don't think, gets a ton of offensive snaps. I think that he would have, again, a very defined role for certain plays. We saw him used for the 2-point conversion play last year. We saw him used a little bit differently, I think, in the preseason, but I think that they feel like Mike Thomas is as a backup outside receiver, and Tyler Boyd just isn't on the field every snap anyway, because he's a slot receiver. And when the Bengals do go 2 wide receivers, he gets a rest. So do you really need a backup slot receiver to play all that much? I don't think so. I think that Trent Taylor is exclusively a slot receiver. And so injuries aside, if he's getting on the field to spell Tyler Boyd from time to time, I think that's only small handful of snaps a game. Whereas Stanley Morgan Jr., I know Jamar Chase has said he doesn't ever want to come off the field anymore, but Stanley Morgan Jr. could get on the field for, I could easily see 8 to 10 snaps a game, especially with his increased usage in the run game. So to me, I still see Trent Taylor behind certainly Morgan and probably also Mike Thomas, who I think the Bengals see as more of a backup to the outside receiver position. But that's partially just the nature of the positions these guys play.
Yeah, I want to see Trent Taylor on punt returns. And I hope we don't see him take any offensive snaps unless it's with Brandon Allen when the Bengals are up 50-0. And that's not me knocking Trent. But if the big three are healthy, you're right, there's not many snaps to go around, even for Stanley Morgan, even for Mike Thomas, who I think both of those guys have the trust of moving around a little bit more in this offense. Now, does Trent Taylor give you a dynamic? No doubt about it. Can he have 5 receptions for 52 yards week 9 against the Browns if needed? Absolutely. But hopefully it doesn't get to that. I will say this, though. His play the other night, I think, really solidified his spot. Like, it's going to be hard, even with Kendrick Pryor pushing, right? Even with Kwame Lassiter having really good sessions, and he caught a bunch of passes on Sunday and Monday again in practice. Even with those guys really surging, Trent Taylor was kind of the weak link. But if he's going to make plays on offense, he's the safest punt return option. So if he's the safest returner and has shown that he can consistently make plays on offense for you when called upon, hard to bet against him making the 53-man roster.
Yeah. The return ability for him is a major equalizer, a major advantage, a major chip that he has that the other receivers don't. But Kendrick Pryor also starting to show on return coverage teams and special teams as well. And if he's going to make the team, that's probably where it is going to come from for him. Despite the showing on offense, is Kendrick Pryor is going to need to continue to show on special teams as well, and has a long way to go to get to wide receiver 4, which is what this question was about. But that's probably where the roster battle lies. We have one more question, James, about a specific player before we move along, or not about a specific player, sorry, about scheme. And to me, this is about a specific player because I immediately think of Dax Hill, but Blue resident at Gem City Bengal. Has Cincinnati been using much 3 safety defense during camp? That could be pretty telling for their plan when, in capital letters, Bates returns.
I don't think it's telling. So there we go. Let's start there. It's not telling. I really don't. I don't think that that's part of it. And no, we haven't seen a ton of the 3 safety stuff. But the reason it's not telling is because Dax is playing Bates's role. He was, and I went back and talked to Dax about it because he did line up in the slot a little bit and stuff like. He was still, that was the safety. That was what the safety's responsibility was on those plays. So they're not really using him anywhere else right now. And I think at some point they will, but as of now, that hasn't been the case.
They did it in the preseason. In the preseason game, they had a 3 safety look where Dax was manned up in the slot on a tight end, and they had 2 safeties behind him playing deep. So we have seen it in games.
I'm talking about Dax moving around a ton and playing different spots. Yeah, of course he's capable of playing the 3 safety look. I'm saying moving Dax around specifically. In practice, it's a lot of 2 safety stuff. Have we seen it some? Yeah, but we haven't seen it jump from what we saw last year, as an example. Now, Dax showed in flash the other night. They're going to find ways to get him on the field. And so what I think is going to be interesting, do they pivot and do a bunch of 3 safety stuff when Bates gets back and we see an increase in that? Or is it different where you just put him in at the nickel spot at times? Do you try him at outside corner a bit in practice? We haven't seen any of that yet. And so that's the part of it, because it might be the same amount of 3 safety looks as last year, but he's also playing the nickel X amount of snaps. And he's also playing outside when called upon. And suddenly you look up and he's playing a bunch of different snaps. So I don't know, but right now they've kept him primarily at safety. So it would have to be the 3 safety look. And we've seen it, but I don't think it's any more than we came to expect it last year, in at times when we did see 3 safeties.
And I do think that the Bengals wanted to do more 3 safety defenses last year and weren't as comfortable doing it with Ricardo Allen's injury. And we started seeing it more when he was healthy and as the year went on. I think it will be a big part of their plan this year. We'll wrap up the mailbag with a few more of your questions coming up next.
But first, a word from BetOnline, your one-stop shop for all things sports wagering. Whether you want to wager on Joey B and the Bengals to be MVP, maybe you think that the Bengals are going to finish the job this time and bring home not an AFC title, but a world championship. Well, you can wager on that and so much more, from Major League Baseball to boxing to NBA future bets. Kevin Durant, get him out of Brooklyn. All these retirement rumors, which are ridiculous. Anyways, NBA futures. So if you think he's going to end up, I don't know, you think he's going to end up in Philly, you might want to get in on the odds right now at BetOnline. You can sign up for free today and start wagering. Make money with BetOnline. I have, you should too, by going to BetOnline, where the game starts.
James, we have one more question about a specific player or rookie. This comes from Greg Luther at Gregor09 on Twitter. Will Zach Carter make a big impact in his rookie season, James?
I certainly think he's capable of making an impact. Now, define big, right? Mm-hmm. Big impact. What does that mean? Does that mean 10 sacks? Because I don't anticipate that. Can he, along with BJ Hill, along with Josh Tupa, all these guys, fill the void that's left behind with Larry Ogunjobi? I'll throw, Joseph Osai into that mix too. But I think so. I think that's the part of it where now, after seeing him practice, seeing him play in a preseason game, you can see the path, much like a Cordell Volson. Different expectations, potentially, depending on who's starting at left guard, but see the path where he is a regular contributor on that defensive line, which was a question mark coming into camp. And now I think it's semi-realistic to expect that. So he's certainly trending in the right direction. And when they picked him 95th overall, Jake, if you would have told me, yeah, he's going to be able to get you 5 sacks and be solid against the run and be a productive player as a rookie, well, then you would sign up for it every day of the week. And I think the path is at least open now for that to being realistic. He needs to improve, of course. There's plenty of things he needs to work on, and he'll tell you that. But I do think he's capable of making an impact this year.
I think that the opportunity will be there for him. And what he does with that opportunity, we'll find out. He played 61 snaps, which is incredible for an interior defensive lineman in any game. He played essentially the whole game in preseason game 1, and he had 37 opportunities to rush a passer according to PFF, and they registered 1 hurry to his credit. I thought he flashed a little bit more of an impact on the game than just 1 hurry. I thought that he was solid, especially early in the game. I thought he wore down a little bit late in the game. Again, we'll see how he does against a higher level of competition, because part of me is thinking, you would expect to have seen a little bit more havoc created from Carter if he's going to play against good interior offensive linemen later in the year against some of the deep backups for the Cardinals. That said, the deep backups for the Cardinals are guys that I would have liked the Bengals to acquire one way or another, guys like Lasita Smith and Marquise Hayes, guys that we talked about in the pre-draft process. So I think that the back end of the Cardinals roster is pretty good on the interior of the defensive line. So we'll see how Carter continues to play. I'm not ready to make any grand proclamations based on 1 preseason game. But I thought that he showed, at the very least, a good motor, the ability to be a rotational piece for this team in 2022 and hopefully the future. And I think that he's taken pretty well to the transition, because he is moving to kind of play a new position here as he goes from Florida to the NFL. He's added weight to do so as well. He was listed at 290 during the game instead of the 283, I think, that he measured at the combine. So if he's added the weight and he's showing that he can play inside from a mental perspective, hopefully the physical traits and the, I guess, the productivity can come along with that. But at the very least, he's going to have the opportunity and has shown flashes that he can be a solid contributor in his role.
Next question comes from Johnny Snotnose, and it's our last question of today's mailbag. Do the Bengals have a 2-year window of opportunity? Looking at the 2024 free agent and potential free agents to be on this roster, he mentions Trey Hendrickson, DJ Reader, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Chidobe Awuzie, Jonah Williams, T. Higgins, Logan Wilson. Also mentioned the club options for Joe Mixon and Joe Burrow. Do you think it's a 2-year window, Jake?
I don't think it's exactly a 2-year window, but there's certainly a rookie window, and the window changes. And this is something that, friend of the show, Joe Goodberry, has talked about quite a bit. The window on a rookie quarterback deal opens essentially immediately, but if not immediately, in year 2, and goes until the end of that rookie contract. That period of time is the time in which NFL teams have a market inefficiency in terms of their quarterback contract. The quarterback contract for Joe Burrow takes up a much smaller portion of the Bengals cap and their annual spending, which is different from the cap, to be clear, than a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen will be, or Deshaun Watson in Cleveland with his fully guaranteed deal. These contracts end up taking away resources that you can spend elsewhere. The Bengals, realizing their opportunity with a rookie quarterback contract and a rookie they had a lot of faith in Joe Burrow, and now has paid off with the Super Bowl appearance, the faith they put in him to try to build a team around him. They spent a lot of money, and they have been spending a lot of money, uncharacteristically for the Bengals, when they didn't have those rookie windows available to them in the late years of the Andy Dalton era. There is some kind of transition that will need to happen. This is why we've talked about the need to draft well to replace some of these guys on the defensive side of the ball, because do you give DJ Reed or Trey Hendrickson, Chidobe Awuzie additional contracts around their age 30 years? And we've seen what happens in age 30 years for various players around the NFL throughout history. Some of them you probably do, some of them you might not. And if you don't, and you're drafting late, and you're not accumulating extra draft picks, which the Bengals aren't accumulating extra draft picks, you need to hit on your draft selections, and you need to continue spending in free agency to continue to have a team around your quarterback when he gets expensive. Because we think Joe Burrow is really, really good. We think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are really, really good. They need to find a way to extend some of these young guys, certainly on their first contracts. But where it will be interesting is what happens on the defensive side of the ball, which has a lot of guys on their second contracts, and finding a way to sustain that will certainly, I think, be the challenge for this team to extend their window. So does the window close? No, but it changes. It's no longer the rookie contract window, whatever you imagine that window to look like in your mind. Now it's, I have a good quarterback, and that always keeps me competitive, but now I have to deal with the obstacles of having a big quarterback contract, as you see around the NFL with every team that has an elite quarterback and a big quarterback contract.
We're going to get the answer about a lot of these guys in March. Like Logan Wilson, at some point, I think they'll try to extend him. Maybe not March, next offseason, I guess would be fair, because he's eligible for an extension then. The same thing goes for a T. Higgins. I think we'll have an idea. And that's the other part of this with Jesse Bates. The Bengals obviously had a max number for him. That wasn't what he wanted. It's one thing to be mad now, but would you rather have a Dax Hill who's still got 2 years left, or maybe 3 years of team control, and Trey Hendrickson locked up for another couple of years, or Jesse Bates, and then you draft someone to replace, so that's the part of it that is, you're right, going to get interesting, especially because they do have Burrow on the docket. They'll probably try to pay him or get him extended next offseason. It doesn't mean that contract will kick in next offseason, but still. So is it a 2-year window? Sort of. They're going to have to kind of switch the way they do things and start getting younger on defense. And that's why the Dax Hill pick makes sense. That's why going defensive heavy made sense in this draft, because it's guys that can contribute now, but maybe can become building blocks moving forward. And that doesn't mean you don't keep Cheeto past his deal, who's just an absolute steal now. It doesn't mean that you don't find a way to keep T and Jamar together. But do I think T, Jamar, Tyler, Boyd, and Joe Mixon are all going to be together in here in 2025? I don't. And I would say that, Tyler Boyd, you never know, but probably unlikely if I had to guess. Joe Mixon, probably the least likely of all these guys. So it is going to be interesting, though, to see how they juggle it, what their plan is, because they're going to have to make some decisions. Here's what I'll say, though, Jake. What a beauty it is. It's just amazing to be talking about a window. Mm-hmm. A window. Because for the past 6 years, going into last season, that window wasn't just shut. It was bolted. It was covered up. It didn't let light in or light out. It was rough. And before that, I think the window was slightly open. but and I've never seen a window with a ceiling, but there was a ceiling to it. And now there isn't. There's no window with a ceiling. It's just a window, and that thing is wide open. There's a breeze. I don't know if you feel it in Canada. There's a breeze coming in right now, which is pretty good. It's a good feeling going into 2022. There's no doubt.
I've got some windows in my house, James, that have little ceilings on them. There's like little notches where you open them. So when you lift the window up, it hits a little notch, so it can only open so much.
Sure.
So I think the reason for that would be someone outside trying to open your window to crawl into your house, and so it limits how. So there's your ceiling for a window. I found it for you.
There you go. Or Andy Dalton, Marvin Lewis.
The Andy Dalton of windows. Sure.
Something like that. I like you, Andy. I'm
Dalton.
not trying to be mean. It's just true.
Guy just can't catch a break.
He can. He's paid a lot of money.
The bottom line is that as long as Joe Burrow is on the Cincinnati Bengals, the window is open. It's just going to be a different shape. It's going to look different than the current window, which allows the Bengals to spend a little bit more aggressively. And that's part of why there is certainly a faction of fans that wants them to continue to spend heavily and use the rest of their cap space.
Yep.
This year, next year.
Yeah, I agree.
And go get some of these guys we've talked about, the Quentin Spains, the veteran tackles that are available, the JC Treaders that fans like to think about. I don't think that's happening, but
Odell Beckham Jr.
Sure. Name a superstar that's available on the free agent market. Cincinnati Bengals fans want him on the team because they sense the opportunity here. And part of that opportunity is because of the financial flexibility that Joe Burrow's rookie deal affords the team. But again, in my opinion, as long as Burrow is on the team, there's a window. It just takes a different shape. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. The Bengals are back to practice on Wednesday, so we have another training camp update or two for you, plus a game preview with the Bengals playing their first Sunday game of the 2022 and only Sunday game of the 2022 preseason. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.